In 2026, the ground has seemed to be moving everywhere. In June, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck the southern Philippines. Later that month, two major earthquakes hit Venezuela within less than a minute of each other. In August, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck western Colombia. Days later, eastern Indonesia was hit by a magnitude 7.7 event. And in southern Spain, Granada entered a continuing seismic sequence, with two magnitude 4.8 earthquakes and hundreds of smaller events recorded around them. Seen one by one, these are separate disasters. Seen together, in news feeds, maps, and phone alerts, they can look like a pattern. So the question is difficult to ignore: are the earthquakes of 2026 connected? And what is really happening beneath our feet? To answer that, we first need to remember that Earth is not a rigid, motionless sphere. Its outer shell is broken into tectonic plates. These enormous slabs move slowly over geological time. Some pull apart, some slide past one another, others collide, and in many places one plate is forced beneath another in a process called subduction. The movement is slow, often only a few centimeters per year, but faults do not always move smoothly. Sections of rock can lock together while the plates continue to push. Stress builds. Eventually, when the fault can no longer hold, it slips. Energy that accumulated over years, decades, or centuries is released in seconds as seismic waves. That is an earthquake. And because plate boundaries form long belts around the planet, earthquake maps are not random. Huge numbers of events occur around the Pacific Ring of Fire, through Indonesia, the Philippines, Japan, the west coasts of the Americas, and many other active zones. Other earthquakes occur inside plates, where old faults and regional stresses can still produce significant events. Now look again at the recent headlines. The Philippines sits in one of the most tectonically complex regions on Earth. Indonesia is crossed by multiple active plate boundaries and subduction zones. Colombia lies along the active northwestern margin of South America. Venezuela has its own major fault systems near the boundary between the Caribbean and South American plates. Southern Spain is affected by the continuing convergence between the African and Eurasian plates and by a network of faults within the Betic region. These places do not share one single fault. They are not pieces of one crack running around the world. They belong to different tectonic systems, each with its own history, stresses, and geometry. That already tells us something important. Several earthquakes occurring in the same year does not automatically mean that they have one common cause. But the answer is not simply no. Earthquakes often do interact, especially when they occur close together. A large rupture changes the stress in the surrounding crust. Nearby faults can be brought closer to failure, and the main event is usually followed by aftershocks. These may continue for days, months, or even years, although their rate generally falls with time. This is why a single main shock can produce hundreds or thousands of additional earthquakes. They are not evidence that the whole planet has suddenly become more unstable. They are part of a local sequence responding to a major change in stress. Granada gives us a useful example. In August 2026, two magnitude 4.8 earthquakes occurred only days apart in the same area. Spain's National Seismic Network described them as intimately related and part of the same seismic series. By August 20th, more than 600 events had been recorded in the broader sequence, according to contemporary reporting. Here, asking whether the earthquakes are connected makes sense, because they are close in space, close in time, and occurring within the same active region. Earthquake clusters can take different forms. If one event is clearly the largest, seismologists call it the main shock. Smaller earthquakes after it are aftershocks. Events before it may later be called foreshocks, but only if a larger earthquake eventually follows. That last point matters. A foreshock cannot normally be identified with certainty at the moment it happens. It becomes a foreshock only in hindsight. A seismic swarm is different. In a swarm, many earthquakes occur in the same region without one obvious main shock dominating the sequence. Swarms can be associated with changing stresses, fluid movement, volcanic systems, or other local processes depending on the region. So when hundreds of earthquakes appear on a map, the number alone does not tell us what is happening. Scientists look at their locations, depths, magnitudes, timing, and fault mechanisms to understand the sequence. This is where the story becomes more subtle. Large earthquakes send seismic waves through the entire planet. Under the right conditions, those passing waves can change stresses enough to trigger small earthquakes at distant locations that were already close to failure. Seismologists call this dynamic triggering. The effect is real. USGS research documents cases in which large earthquakes have triggered distant seismic activity, sometimes thousands of kilometers away. But that does not mean every large earthquake starts a domino chain of other large earthquakes around the world. Remote triggering is most commonly observed as relatively small activity in faults, volcanic regions, or geothermal systems that were already critically stressed. Demonstrating that one distant earthquake caused another requires detailed timing, wave, and statistical evidence. Mere coincidence on a calendar is not enough. So the earthquakes in Venezuela, Colombia, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Grenada cannot simply be connected by drawing lines between them on a map. Now we reach the question behind the question. Maybe the earthquakes are not one global chain, but are there simply more of them this year? According to the U.S. Geological Survey, temporary increases and decreases in global seismicity are part of normal fluctuations. The agency explicitly states that the growing number of earthquakes in modern catalogs does not mean Earth is producing more earthquakes. One major reason is that we now have more instruments capable of detecting them. The National Earthquake Information Center locates about 20,000 earthquakes around the world each year, roughly 55 every day. For major earthquakes, the long-term record since around 1900 gives another useful benchmark. USGS says we expect roughly 16 magnitude 7 or greater earthquakes in an average year, about 15 in the magnitude 7 range, and 1 magnitude 8 or larger. By August 15, 2026, 11 earthquakes of magnitude 7 or greater had been recorded worldwide. That is enough to produce extraordinary headlines, especially because several affected populated regions, but it is not by itself evidence of an abnormal global increase. In some years, the total is well above the long-term average. In others, it is far below it. The pattern can look dramatic without being statistically unprecedented. So why does 2026 feel so seismic? Part of the answer is timing. Human attention is extremely sensitive to clusters. If several large earthquakes occur within weeks of one another, our brains naturally connect them. We are pattern-seeking animals, and repeated headlines make a sequence feel meaningful, even when the events arise from different tectonic systems. Part of the answer is technology. Modern seismic networks detect far more small earthquakes than older networks could. A tremor that might once have gone unnoticed can now appear almost instantly on a global map, and part of the answer is communication. Smartphones, social media, security cameras, and live news mean that we can watch the same earthquake from dozens of angles within minutes. A damaging event in a distant country no longer feels distant in the way it did a century ago. This does not make the earthquakes less real. It changes how much of Earth's constant activity becomes visible to us. So what is behind the earthquakes of 2026? Not one hidden global mechanism, not a single fracture circling the planet, and, based on current evidence, not a demonstrated worldwide acceleration in natural earthquake activity. What lies behind them is a restless planet divided into moving plates, crossed by faults that accumulate stress on very different timescales. Some earthquakes in the same region are genuinely connected through stress transfer and aftershock sequences. Some clusters are swarms driven by local processes. Very large earthquakes can occasionally trigger distant small events in vulnerable systems, but major earthquakes separated by oceans and unrelated plate boundaries should not be assumed to form one causal chain without specific evidence. In other words, the interesting truth is more complicated than the alarming version, and much more revealing. The earthquakes of 2026 remind us that the surface beneath our cities is only the thin outer skin of a dynamic planet. Grenada, Colombia, Venezuela, the Philippines, and Indonesia may appear together on the same timeline, but geology does not organize itself according to our news cycle. For now, the global data do not show that natural earthquakes are simply increasing everywhere. What they show is something more fundamental. Earth is always active. Local earthquake sequences can be intense, and our ability to detect and witness them has never been greater. The next time several earthquakes appear in the headlines at once, the most useful question may not be, is the whole planet suddenly changing? It may be which of these events are physically related and which only look connected because we are seeing them at the same time. If you want to keep exploring the science, history, and hidden processes that shape our world, subscribe to Growing Curiosity and join us in the next episode.